As a result of the mandate IPSS received from the African Union, IPSS took up the intellectual challenge of defining African solutions, specifically in peace and security. Workshop in 2014 took place, experts gathering, that was able to narrow down the concept of African-centered solutions into three main principles. That is ownership, commitment, and shared values. In 2015, IPSS produced a report of these main principles and asked intellectuals all over the world, and especially Africa, to test this concept in several case studies. So from these, we had several intellectuals from all over Africa respond to this call. From them, we selected 14 specific case studies, and we had a workshop and presentations and a very deep deliberation on these concepts and the case studies. Following this, in 2015, we were able to publish a book on African-centered solutions, defining what it means and how it can be applied to different cases, and of course, identifying gaps of research for others to follow up. This workshop that we now have, the symposium that IPSS has organized with USIP, takes up this book, and of course IPSS has also published a journal, takes up these publications and invites more people to contribute to this concept in concretizing it and addressing contemporary issues such as election violence and extremism.
This is a topic that IPSS has embraced for the last several years, and we made it one of the major research themes for the Institute, because we believe that in Africa we must develop the mechanisms for addressing peace and security issues using the appropriate African-produced and African-centered methodology and solutions.
And we started making some good progress in finding ways by which we could actually bring African-centered solution as a notion, as a concept, as an ideology, as a theory to the policymakers, to academia, to grassroots communities, civil societies, to religious leaders, so that we begin to understand this notion. And on the one hand, there were also a lot of things happening in Africa, like the case of Libya. So I believe that it's very important for us to move forward and carry on with what we have already done so far, and operationalize the concept, enrich the concept, and make it a feeling in African practice and actions. A systematic strategy is necessary to be designed and build on what we already have, so that we can continue popularizing the African-centered solution for peace and security in Africa.
We worked with the United States Institute of Peace, who also is developing activities and programs with youth and with academicians and practitioners throughout Africa on similar topics. So we thought that we should bring those synergies together and to develop a program where we can bring those who contributed to our journal with those who have been working with USIP on similar issues, in order to discuss and to think together about how can we move forward with the concept of African solutions to African problems. So we brought about 40 people together from Africa and beyond in order to discuss in 3 days the perspectives of how can we work with African solutions and how can we enhance such methodology.
The idea that IPSS came up with is a noble idea. Is a noble idea because this is the only way we can assure our fellow Africans that in fact the link between knowledge and policy can actually be practicable.
We're trying to unravel what is the idea of African solutions to African problems. For us to get to that stage where Africa can address its challenges at 3 levels of analysis, at the global, at the national level, and also at the regional level. In terms of the global aspect, I looked at how the misgivings of the efficiency, reliability, and motive of external intervention interventions are causes for alarm within the continent, and they encourage Africans to be able to be at the forefront. Now, that is not to say that external interventions are diabolic or troubling, but African actors need to be at the forefront of implementation and conceptualization of their solutions. The national aspect that African state actors have not been able to live up to the dreams of independence, and we have the challenge of insecurities, political repression within the continent, and those are factors that limit African actors from projecting their values across the globe. And there's also the question of massive divide between the civil society and African governments. We have the challenges within the region, regional corporations. So the African Union, although it has achieved some successes, there are challenges in terms of it being able to seriously address peace and security concerns within the continent.
I have made a presentation on the need for an alternative, culturally relevant, people-centered approach to conflict prevention, management and resolution in a nutshell. In order to be alternative, of course, such an approach has to incorporate the two dimensions, that is culture on the one side, but also people-centeredness, and continue abiding by its own principles and values, and some of them I have referred to. One of them is the centrality of Ubuntu, which is a human being. This is in some of the so-called Bantu languages, African languages, which considers the human being as central and as a high status, not only from an ontological level, but also from a social and political level. Even beyond that, the policies have to be people-centered, because the leaders within that context of African Africa has to provide guidance, a vision, but also a protective shield for both his constituencies, the citizenry, as well as their own assets and property. So I hope that these values and principles that are characteristic of African societies, so pre-colonial societies, but also today's societies, because we find the same values and principles at work in many African societies of today, that this can be relevant for the search for African solutions to African problems, which is a motto and the mission of the Institute of Peace and Security Studies through the African AFSOL journal.
I'm happy about this seminar, which examined the place of traditional conflict resolution mechanisms in Ethiopia and in many other African countries. These mechanisms, particularly in Ethiopia, are widely used. Society, especially at grassroots level, on daily basis, these ideas, institutions are very much in use, and they do two things at the same time. One is they settle legal quarrels, and secondly, they afford social peace. So it is both a question of legal justice and also peacemaking. It is these traditional mechanisms which have been dealt with in this seminar. We have heard lots of interesting examples, how effective and how much they have been used and how effective they have been. And it is interesting, they are lively, definitely.
The session that I chaired right now was about women and youth and their role in the prevention of the externalization of society, specifically looking at Nigeria and Kenya, Boko Haram, of course. The discussants were extremely influential and also very, very powerful in the amount of contribution that they are making within their societies to ameliorate them, not least also thanks to the help that they are receiving from USIP as grantees.
And so we're really excited that we've been able to bring together our partners from Nigeria, Mali, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda to share their lessons learned, but also to situate that more broadly in the African-centered solutions discussions.
Today, we have already hit the headlines, and we have been recognized that these solutions for peace and security in Africa needs to be revisited. We need a methodology, how to collect data at the different levels of analysis, the grassroots communities, the national, the regional, the continental. We need methodologies that can quantify, that can qualify also our principles. When we talk about principle of ownership, how do we quantify it? How do we qualify it? When we talk about principles of shared values, when we talk about the way of life, the psychology of African way of life, culturally, socially, economically, politically, how do we quantify? What methodologies do we use to measure all these factors and bring these principles to light of commitment, principle of shared values, and many others?
For instance, when we look at some of the models that have been initiated by the African Union, to be specific, the African Standby Force, even though there are a few challenges here and there, capability challenges, challenges in terms of resource, I think Africans can be proud that 15 years after the initiation of the policy that brought the ASF, we can be able to deploy multidimensional forces to different conflict situations. We've seen the successes in Somalia, we saw successes in Mali. We are also yet to see other successes on the continent.
So we are still yet to score a little bit more and more. So we need to also see who are our end users. We could say yes, the AU and the continental body, yes, the regional economic communities, but the heads of states are also going to use them in the national level, and also it should go to the grassroots communities.
And it's up to us as researchers also to make sure that the decisions that are being made by our different governments are based on real knowledge and taking into consideration African people's interests and aspirations.
We are very pleased with the effort we are making, and we think that a good document will come out of the meeting we have, the symposium, and we look forward to making this symposium a constant effort, perhaps to be repeated every year or 2 years, to see how we are progressing, and eventually to develop models for impact assessment to see if our work is actually being absorbed in the policy making circles, and with what effect and impact on peace and security issues in Africa.